Saving her nearly killed him, but what the alien woman gave in return was beyond imagination. Captain Ethan Gray was no stranger to the harshness of war. As a soldier in the Earth Defense Forces, he had fought on countless planets, facing alien threats, hostile environments, and the brutal realities of intergalactic warfare. But nothing had prepared him for the alien world he now found himself on, a desolate planet far from Earth, on the edge of a war that seemed to be spiraling out of control. His mission was simple: infiltrate the enemy's stronghold, gather vital intelligence, and escape before the enemy could retaliate. However, as soon as Ethan stepped foot on the alien planet, things started to go wrong. The planet, which was supposed to be a barren wasteland, turned out to be home to an advanced alien species, the Valorans. The Valorans were a powerful race, known for their intelligence and unmatched technological advancements. But there was something about this particular planet that made Ethan uneasy. It was too quiet, too still. The air was thick with tension, and the gravity was heavier than he had anticipated, making every step feel like a burden. Ethan had always been resourceful, a soldier who could adapt to any situation, but even he found himself struggling. The communication system was down, the intel was outdated, and the enemy seemed to be everywhere. He was alone, surrounded by hostile forces, and time was running out. As Ethan pushed forward, weaving through the alien terrain, he stumbled upon something he hadn't expected: a woman. She was unlike any creature he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered with a strange, otherworldly glow, and her eyes, large and golden, seemed to hold a depth of knowledge that was both captivating and unsettling. She was chained, her wrists bound by a thick metallic restraint that glinted in the faint light of the planet's twin suns. The woman was clearly an alien, yet her humanity was undeniable. There was something in her eyes, something that reached out to Ethan, something that made him forget the mission, the enemy, and everything else. She was in pain, but her gaze was not one of despair. Instead, it was filled with determination, as if she had known hardship her entire life and was prepared to endure whatever came next. Ethan's training kicked in. He was a soldier, and soldiers didn't leave people behind. Not even alien women chained up in the middle of nowhere. Without thinking, he sprinted towards her. The alien woman's eyes widened in surprise, but she made no attempt to resist. She had no hope of freeing herself, not with the way the chains were constructed, and not with the enemy forces closing in. But Ethan couldn't just leave her there, not like this. He grabbed the chains, his fingers trembling slightly as he examined the locks. He was no expert in alien technology, but he knew how to break things. With a quick twist of his wrist, he released the first lock. The second came off with a sharp click, and the third was more stubborn, but Ethan persisted, pulling with all his strength until it finally gave way. The chains fell to the ground with a metallic thud. The woman stood up slowly, her gaze locked on Ethan, and for a moment they just stared at each other. There were no words, no thank yous, just a silent understanding between them. Ethan felt a strange pull, as if this moment was more significant than just a rescue. It was as though their fates were somehow intertwined. Before he could say anything, a loud explosion shook the ground beneath them, and the woman's expression changed instantly. She pushed Ethan behind a rock for cover just as a hail of energy blasts tore through the air. The enemy was close, and they had just discovered Ethan's presence. Ethan's heart raced as he scrambled to draw his weapon, but the alien woman's hand shot out, stopping him. Her golden eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made him hesitate. "Run," she said, her voice a soft, melodic whisper that seemed to cut through the chaos around them. Ethan didn't argue. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he trusted her. She had just saved him from getting shot, after all. The two of them sprinted through the thick alien forest, weaving between towering, bioluminescent trees and dodging blasts from the enemy soldiers who were now pursuing them. Ethan was fast, but the alien woman was faster. She moved with a grace that seemed almost supernatural, her every step precise, her movements fluid and unhurried despite the danger. As they ran, Ethan glanced over at her, trying to keep up. She didn't seem tired, didn't seem to be struggling, despite the fact that she was still injured from her time in captivity. Her strength was almost unnatural. They ran for what felt like hours, though in truth it was only minutes. They finally reached a clearing, but the sound of their pursuers was getting closer. Ethan could hear them now, shouting orders in a language he didn't understand, their footsteps heavy as they closed in. Suddenly, the alien woman stopped. She turned to face Ethan, her expression unreadable. "Get to the ship," she said, her voice firm. "I will hold them off." Ethan shook his head, his chest heaving. "I'm not leaving you behind." "You have no choice," she replied. "Go now." He could see the fire in her eyes, the determination that had brought her this far. She wasn't asking him to leave. She was telling him to, as though it was the only way they would both survive. Reluctantly, Ethan turned and ran. He pushed his body harder than he ever had before, ignoring the burning in his legs and the fear that gripped his chest. He could still hear her, her movements echoing in his mind, and though he knew he should be focusing on his escape, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving something, someone important behind. The enemy was closing in. Ethan had to move faster. He couldn't fail. He reached the ship just as the first of the enemy soldiers rounded the corner, their weapons raised. Ethan dived into the cockpit, slamming the door shut behind him. He didn't wait for clearance. He didn't wait for anything. The ship lifted off the ground, jerking him into his seat as he punched the engines to full power. He had to escape. He had to make it back to the fleet. But as he looked out the window, his heart sank. The alien woman, Arla, was still back there, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. As the ship soared into the sky, Ethan glanced at the control panel, his mind racing. He was alive. He had survived, but at what cost? He wasn't sure what would happen next. But one thing was clear. This woman, this alien woman, had saved his life. And somehow he knew that what he had just witnessed was only the beginning of a far greater story. What had she given him in return for his act of mercy? He couldn't even begin to imagine. The ship hurtled through the alien sky, its engines roaring as Ethan gripped the controls, his knuckles white from the force. The stars outside blurred into streaks of light as he accelerated, trying to put as much distance as possible between himself and the planet below. His mind was racing, a whirlwind of thoughts. He couldn't stop thinking about Arla, the alien woman he had just saved. She had stayed behind, fighting against impossible odds so he could escape. He had only known her for a short time, but in those fleeting moments, something had changed in him. She was different, stronger than anyone he had ever met. She had powers, abilities that defied everything he thought he knew about the universe. When she had held him back, telling him to run, he knew she wasn't just saving his life. She was giving him a chance to survive and to fight for something greater than just one battle. The ship's computer beeped, bringing Ethan back to reality. A map of the galaxy blinked on the screen, showing his current location and the nearest space station. He was miles away from the planet, but the question on his mind was where to go next. He needed help, but he had no idea who to trust anymore. The Valorans had proven to be ruthless, and if the rebels had betrayed him, who could he rely on? Ethan's thoughts drifted back to Arla. He couldn't shake the memory of her face, her eyes, those golden eyes that seemed to hold the weight of the universe within them. What had she meant when she told him to leave? Why had she chosen to stay behind and face the enemy alone? He ran his fingers through his short brown hair, frustration mounting. He had left her behind. He had no choice. She had insisted, but there was still a part of him, something deep inside, that told him he should have stayed and fought with her. The ship's navigation system flashed a warning. It was too soon to relax. The Valoran fleet was still active, and if they were hunting him, they would be looking for any sign of his escape. He needed to get out of the system fast. The nearest station was a few hours away, but even that wasn't safe. Ethan punched in a course for the station anyway, hoping to get some answers and find a way to reconnect with the others. The stars outside the window seemed endless, and Ethan was reminded of how small he really was in the grand scheme of things. He had always thought of himself as someone who could handle anything, a soldier, a warrior. But now, faced with the unknown, he realized that there was so much more to learn, so much more to understand. The hours dragged on as Ethan piloted the ship through the emptiness of space. His thoughts kept returning to Arla. Who was she really? Where did she come from? And what was this power she had? Ethan had never seen anything like it. She had saved him, not with weapons or advanced technology, but with something else entirely, something he didn't understand. There was a connection between them, something that went beyond just the physical. When she had touched him, when she had looked at him with those intense eyes, it was as if something passed between them. He had felt it, a deep, pulsing energy that surged through him. It was like she had opened a door inside of him, one that he didn't know existed. The ship's autopilot engaged, and Ethan finally allowed himself to relax for a moment. He leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. The quiet hum of the ship was a small comfort, but it did little to ease the knot of anxiety that had settled in his stomach. He hadn't realized how much he needed a purpose, something bigger than just surviving. He had always been driven by duty. His mission had been simple: get in, get out, gather intel, and escape. But now he was questioning everything. What was he really fighting for? Was it just to survive, or was there something more? And what about Arla? What had she meant when she said she wasn't afraid? Why did she sacrifice herself for him? Ethan didn't know the answers to those questions. All he knew was that he couldn't forget her. He couldn't let her sacrifice be in vain. The ship's systems beeped, alerting him to an incoming transmission. Ethan's eyes snapped open, and he quickly reached for the communication panel. It was a coded message, one that could only be from the rebel faction he had once trusted. He hesitated for a moment before opening the message. His fingers hovered over the console as he wondered whether this would be another betrayal or an opportunity. The message was short, but it contained critical information. The Valoran fleet is tracking you. They have a lead on your location. Get to the Black Moon station. We'll help you, but you need to get there fast. Trust no one else. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The Black Moon station was a known safe haven for outlaws and mercenaries. It was a place where people could disappear, where things could get done without questions being asked. But the message was cryptic. The warning to trust no one else lingered in his mind. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to be cautious. He didn't know if he could trust the rebels anymore, especially after what had happened with the traitor. But he had no choice. The Valoran fleet was closing in, and he needed to get to safety. He had to find answers. Without another word, Ethan set a course for the Black Moon station. As the ship altered its trajectory, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He was no longer just running from the enemy. He was heading towards something, towards a future that was uncertain, but one that held promise. The ship broke through the edge of the system, and the stars shifted once again. Ethan knew that whatever awaited him at the Black Moon station would change everything. The choices he made now would define the next phase of his journey. Hours passed, and the ship finally entered the Black Moon's orbit. The station was a massive structure, suspended in the dark void of space like a colossal spider waiting for prey. Ethan felt a wave of unease wash over him as he approached. This place was known for its lawlessness, its danger. It was a place where alliances shifted as quickly as the tides, and trust was a commodity that was always in short supply. The station's docking bay loomed ahead, and Ethan prepared himself for whatever lay ahead. As the ship docked, he quickly shut down the engines and grabbed his gear. His pulse quickened. This was it. He had no idea who he would meet here, but he knew one thing for sure. This was the beginning of something far bigger than himself. The fight was just beginning, and Arla, wherever she was the key to everything. Ethan stepped out of the ship and into the dimly lit docking bay. The air smelled stale, the hum of machinery echoing around him. There was no telling who was watching, who could be a friend or foe, but one thing was certain: he would find Arla again, and he would get the answers he needed. He wasn't sure how yet, but he would. And nothing, not the Valorans nor anyone else, would stop him. The Black Moon station loomed ahead, its cold, mechanical structure glowing faintly against the backdrop of space. The moment Ethan stepped off the ship and into the station's docking bay, he was hit by the smell of oil and machinery. The air was thick with the sound of distant clanking and the hum of machinery, giving the station an eerie, almost alive feeling. It was a place where lawlessness thrived and danger was ever present. Ethan had no illusions about what he was walking into. The message he had received from the rebels had been brief, too brief, and he didn't fully trust it. The Black Moon station was no ordinary outpost. It was a haven for criminals, mercenaries, and anyone looking to disappear. There was no guarantee that the rebels were still loyal, or if they even had the resources to help him. But he had no choice. The Valoran fleet was still hunting him, and he needed to find a way to stop them before they found him first. As Ethan made his way through the dark corridors of the station, the lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. The station was old, its walls covered in rust and grime, the air stale with the scent of decades of neglect. Yet, despite its disrepair, the station buzzed with life. He passed through groups of people, mercenaries, smugglers, and drifters, who eyed him suspiciously as he moved through their midst. There was no warmth here, no camaraderie. Everyone was a potential threat. Everyone had their own agenda. Ethan kept his head down, blending in with the crowd as best as he could. His mind kept returning to Arla. Where was she? Was she still alive? He had to believe that she was. He couldn't let her sacrifice be for nothing. But he had no idea where to start looking. The message had been vague. The Black Moon Station wasn't exactly the place where you found answers to questions. It was a place where you had to fight for everything you got. He stopped in front of a large, dimly lit door, the sign above it barely readable. It was marked with a symbol that Ethan didn't recognize. The door slid open with a mechanical hiss, revealing a small, dingy room. Inside, there were a few people sitting at tables, playing cards or talking in hushed voices. The air was thick with smoke, and the low murmur of conversation filled the room. At the back of the room, behind a bar, stood a tall, scarred man with a cybernetic arm. He looked up as Ethan entered, his eyes narrowing as he sized him up. "Looking for something, stranger?" the man asked, his voice rough, like gravel being ground underfoot. Ethan hesitated, his fingers brushing the blaster at his side. "I'm looking for someone, a woman. She's different from the others." He didn't know how else to explain it. Arla wasn't just any person. She had abilities, something more than human. And Ethan was beginning to realize that finding her wouldn't be as simple as walking into a bar and asking around. The man's eyes flickered with recognition. "You're not the first to ask about her," he said, his voice dropping lower. "But you'll find no answers here, not in this place. If you want to find her, you're going to have to dig deeper." Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady but urgent. "I don't have time to waste. Tell me where to go. I don't care how dangerous it is." The man studied him for a moment, then motioned for Ethan to sit. "Fine, but it won't be easy. There's a place on the station where they keep people like her, people who aren't just ordinary prisoners. It's a black market operation. I don't know much more than that, but if she's still alive, that's where she'll be." Ethan's pulse quickened. This was the lead he had been waiting for. It wasn't much, but it was something. He nodded, his mind already running through the possibilities. He couldn't afford to waste time. Arla was out there, and he had to find her. "Thanks," Ethan said, standing up. "I'll find it." The man didn't say anything as Ethan left the room, but the look in his eyes lingered in Ethan's mind. He didn't trust the man, but he had no choice but to follow the lead. If he wanted to find Arla, he would have to take risks, big ones. The Black Moon Station wasn't a place for hesitation. As Ethan moved through the maze of hallways, the weight of the station pressed down on him. He passed more people, some with weapons, some with faces that had seen too much. It was a place of survival where the strong ruled and the weak were left to fend for themselves. Ethan had seen places like this before, but this one felt different. It felt colder, more dangerous. Finally, after what seemed like hours, he arrived at a door that matched the description the man had given him. It was unmarked, hidden in the back of the station, far away from the main corridors. Ethan hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the door. This was it. This was where he would find the answers, or where he would lose everything. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was dark, its only light coming from the flickering screens of old monitors along the walls. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and grease, and the hum of machinery filled the room. A group of people stood in the center, their backs turned to him. As Ethan stepped forward, the room went silent. The people turned, their eyes locking onto him with cold, calculating expressions. One of them, a tall woman with short-cropped hair and a cybernetic eye, stepped forward. She didn't speak, but her gaze told him everything he needed to know. She was in charge here. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice smooth, almost too calm. "I'm looking for someone," Ethan said, his voice steady. "An alien woman. She's not like the others. She's different. I was told she might be here." The woman's expression didn't change, but Ethan could see a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She nodded slightly, signaling to one of the others in the room. The man she signaled stepped forward and handed Ethan a small, metallic device. It was a tracker, a small one, but it was enough to find anyone. "This will help you," the woman said. "But you're going to need more than just this to get her out. There are people who will stop at nothing to keep her here, people who will kill for her." Ethan took the tracker, his fingers tightening around it. He didn't care about the danger. He didn't care about the people who would try to stop him. He was going to find Arla, no matter what it took. "Where do I go next?" Ethan asked, his voice urgent. The woman looked at him for a long moment, then nodded toward the door. Follow the tracker, but be careful. The station is crawling with spies. The Valorans have eyes everywhere. Ethan didn't wait for her to say anything more. He turned and walked out of the room, the tracker in his hand, the weight of his mission pressing down on him. He had come this far. He couldn't turn back now. As he moved through the station, the sense of urgency grew. He couldn't help but feel that time was running out. Arla was out there somewhere, and he would stop at nothing to find her. The Black Moon Station was a maze of shadows and secrets, but Ethan was determined. He couldn't let fear or doubt slow him down. Arla had given him a chance to survive, and now it was his turn to give her the same. He was going to find her, and when he did, he would make sure no one ever took her from him again. The tracker in Ethan's hand pulsed softly, its small red light flashing at regular intervals as he walked through the darkened corridors of the Black Moon Station. His steps echoed against the cold metal walls, and the weight of the device in his palm seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. The urgency was building, and despite the chaos of the station around him, he couldn't ignore the tight knot of anxiety in his chest. Arla was close. He could feel it like a pull in his gut that he couldn't explain. But so were the dangers, and that knowledge made his skin crawl. The station was full of eyes, hidden, watching. There were too many people here who had no loyalty, no allegiances. In places like this, alliances shifted as quickly as a coin flip. Ethan didn't trust anyone, not anymore. The traitor in the rebel faction had shown him how easy it was for people to turn on each other when the stakes were high. He had to be cautious, but he also knew he couldn't afford to waste any more time. The tracker led him deeper into the station, farther away from the docking bay and into the more dangerous sections of the outpost. This was the area where few dared to go, the industrial heart of the station, where things were fixed, broken, and discarded. Ethan wasn't sure why Arla would be here, but he didn't have the luxury of questioning it. Every turn he made felt like he was descending further into the heart of darkness, but he pressed on, his focus locked onto the faint red pulse of the tracker. It wasn't long before he encountered a locked door. It was simple, no signs, no markings, but there was something about it that felt important. The tracker's light blinked faster and Ethan's pulse quickened. This was it. Whatever lay beyond this door was where Arla was being kept, or at least where he might find a clue that would lead him to her. Ethan pushed against the door, and with a slight hiss, it slid open. The room was dimly lit, its only illumination coming from the flickering glow of old monitors stacked along the walls. The air was heavy with the scent of old machinery and stale air, the kind of place where only those desperate enough to survive came to work. The floor was littered with tools, cables, and other discarded debris. It looked like a junkyard, except for the cage in the center of the room. His heart skipped. Inside the cage was a figure, seated on the ground with her back against the bars. Her long, silver hair fell around her shoulders, and her eyes were closed as though she were resting. Ethan didn't need to see her face to know who it was. He had seen those eyes before, eyes that glowed like gold, full of wisdom and secrets. It was Arla, but something was wrong. She wasn't moving, her body was still, her breathing shallow. Fear surged through Ethan as he rushed toward the cage. He didn't care who was watching or who might be waiting. He had come for her, and nothing would stop him now. He reached the cage, pulling at the lock with desperation. His fingers fumbled for a moment as he tried to unlock it. It was old, rusted, but he couldn't afford to waste time. Finally, with a loud click, the lock gave way and the cage door swung open. Ethan stepped inside, kneeling beside Arla. Her eyes flickered open, her golden irises meeting his with a look that was both tired and knowing. "You came," she whispered, her voice hoarse, but there was a softness in it that soothed him. "I promised," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not leaving you again." He helped her to her feet, his hands steady despite the panic that surged through him. Arla was still weak, her movements slow, but she wasn't completely powerless. She leaned against him, her strength fading but still present. The room was silent except for their breathing, and Ethan could hear the faint hum of the station around them. He could feel the weight of the moment, the tension in the air, but there was also a sense of relief. He had found her, she was alive. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Arla's golden eyes met his again, and there was a shared understanding between them. They were in this together now. The outside world could wait. But there was something else, something that Arla wasn't telling him, something hidden behind the veil of her calm demeanor. He could feel it like a pulse in the back of his mind. "What happened to you?" Ethan finally asked, his voice quiet but urgent. Why didn't you leave with me? Arla's expression darkened, her eyes shifting away as if searching for the right words. I had to stay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They wanted something from me, something I couldn't give them. I had no choice but to let them think they won. They kept me here because they knew I could help them. Ethan's heart sank as the weight of her words hit him. They had been after her for her powers, for the abilities she had, abilities beyond human understanding. They had trapped her here, but there was more to the story than she was telling him. Arla wasn't just a prisoner. She was something more, something that could change the course of the entire war. Tell me everything, Ethan pressed, his voice demanding but gentle. He couldn't lose her again, not now, not after everything. Arla hesitated, her eyes flickering as if deciding how much to reveal. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. I am not like them, not like anyone else. My people, she paused, her face betraying a deep sadness. My people hid their true power from the universe. They feared what would happen if others discovered it. I am one of the last of my kind. Ethan listened intently, his mind racing. What kind of power? He asked, his voice edged with disbelief. What are they after? Arla's gaze grew distant, as if recalling a memory long buried. It's not just a power, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It's the ability to manipulate energy, to change the fabric of space itself. I can do things that could turn the tide of the war. They want me to help them, to weaponize my abilities, but I won't. I won't become their tool. Ethan stood there, processing her words. It was overwhelming, but at the same time it made sense. Arla was more than just an alien woman. She was a key. The Valorans knew it, and so did the rebels. That's why they had all been chasing her. They can't have you, Ethan said firmly, gripping her arm gently to support her. We won't let them use you. Arla nodded, her golden eyes locking onto his. I won't let them use me either, she said, a hint of resolve in her voice. But we have to be careful. There are more of them, and they'll come for me again. Ethan glanced at the door, his senses heightened. He could feel it now, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. It was only a matter of time before the enemy discovered they were gone. We need to move, he said, his voice steady but urgent. Now. Arla nodded, and together they made their way toward the exit. Ethan's hand hovered near his weapon, ready for anything. They couldn't afford to take chances. As they stepped into the hallway, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the other side. They were not alone. A sharp, cold voice rang out from the shadows. Thought you could escape, did you? Ethan's heart raced as a group of Valoran soldiers emerged from the darkness, weapons raised. He knew this moment would come, but he wasn't ready to go down without a fight. Arla's eyes flashed with golden light as she stepped forward, her hands raised. Stay back, she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. Ethan barely had time to react as the Valorans hesitated, their weapons lowering slightly. It was clear they were unsure of what they were dealing with, but Ethan knew it wouldn't last long. He wasn't going to wait around to find out what happened next. Run, he shouted. And with that, the battle for Arla's freedom began. The hallway was narrow, dimly lit by flickering lights that seemed to pulse in time with Ethan's racing heart. Arla moved swiftly beside him, her steps light but purposeful, her golden eyes scanning the space ahead with a sharpness that seemed out of place in such a chaotic, decrepit station. The Valoran soldiers were close now, their footsteps echoing down the hall, and Ethan knew there wasn't much time. His hand tightened around the blaster at his side as they reached a junction in the corridor. Left, Arla said, her voice low but steady. Her golden eyes flickered toward a door at the end of the hall. It was marked with a faded symbol, one that looked like a warning, but Ethan didn't care. He had to trust her. He nodded, moving quickly, and the two of them sprinted toward the door, which opened automatically with a soft hiss as they neared. Behind them, the sound of the soldiers' pursuit grew louder, but they had no choice but to keep moving. The room beyond the door was small, its walls covered with old machinery and empty crates. It looked like a storage area, but to Ethan it was a sanctuary, at least for the moment. The door slammed shut behind them, and Ethan pressed his back against it, his breath coming in short bursts. Arla stood across the room, her posture calm but alert. She was still weak, but there was a fire in her eyes that told Ethan she wasn't done yet. We can't stay here long, he said, glancing around for any possible escape routes. They'll be looking for us. I know, Arla replied, her voice soft but filled with conviction. But I have a plan. I can get us out of here, but we have to move fast. Ethan frowned, glancing back at her. What do you mean you have a plan? I told you before, Arla said, her voice growing stronger. My people have powers beyond what you can imagine. The Valorans were trying to force me to use them, but I've been holding back. Now it's time to use everything I can. Before Ethan could respond, Arla raised her hands, her eyes glowing with a brilliant golden light. The room seemed to pulse with energy as the air around them thickened, vibrating with a low hum that Ethan could feel deep in his chest. The machinery in the room began to move on its own, the crates shifting and sliding as if controlled by an invisible force. Ethan stared in disbelief, watching as the room seemed to bend to Arla's will. I can control the energy around me, she explained, her voice calm despite the immense power she was wielding. I can move things, manipulate them, and create barriers, but it's hard. It takes a lot of focus, and right now we don't have much time. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to wrap his head around what he was seeing. He had known Arla was different, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. How much time do we have? He asked, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. Not long, Arla replied, but I can make a way out. We just need to get to the control room at the center of the station. Once we get there, I can access the systems and override the security. It'll create a distraction enough for us to slip away. Ethan nodded. He wasn't sure how she planned to pull it off, but right now he had no other options. He trusted her, and if they didn't act soon, they were both dead. We need to go, Ethan said, his voice urgent. Now, Arla nodded, her golden eyes flickering toward the door. Stay close, she said, and don't let anyone get in our way. They moved quickly, silently slipping out of the room and back into the hallway. Ethan kept his eyes peeled, listening for any signs of the soldiers who were still hunting them. The hum of Arla's energy was still in the air, a constant reminder of the power she held. He couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and fear as he followed her down the darkened corridors. They passed more rooms, more abandoned sections of the station, but they didn't stop. They couldn't afford to. Every second counted. Ethan's mind raced as they neared the central control room. The entire station was a maze of passages and hallways, and every turn seemed to bring them closer to danger. But Arla's presence was a constant source of strength, her calmness anchoring him as they moved forward. Finally, they reached the door to the control room. Arla stepped forward, her hands glowing with that familiar golden light as she extended them toward the panel next to the door. The lights on the panel flickered as Arla's energy flowed through it, and with a soft click, the door slid open. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, his senses heightened as they stepped inside. The room was filled with rows of consoles, each one displaying data and readings from across the station. The hum of machinery was louder here, and the air felt thicker, more alive with the energy of the station's systems. Get to the main console, Arla said, her voice urgent. I'll take care of the rest. Ethan nodded, quickly moving toward the central console. His fingers flew across the controls, trying to bring up the station's layout and find a way to disable the security systems. But as he worked, he could hear the sound of footsteps approaching again, getting closer. We don't have much time, Arla said, her voice strained. I'm going to start the process, but it might take a minute. You need to hold them off. Ethan didn't hesitate. He reached for his blaster, his heart pounding in his chest as he moved toward the door. The soldiers were close now. They were almost here. He steadied his breathing, taking position near the door. He knew he couldn't take on all of them, but he had to buy Arla enough time to finish what she had started. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and then the door to the control room slammed open, revealing a group of heavily armed Valoran soldiers. Stop right there, one of the soldiers shouted, aiming his weapon at Ethan. You're under arrest. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He couldn't let them take him, couldn't let them take Arla. He raised his blaster, firing a shot that hit one of the soldiers in the shoulder, sending him crashing to the floor. The others ducked for cover, returning fire, but Ethan was quick, moving from side to side, using the consoles as cover. You have to hurry, Ethan shouted to Arla. We can't hold them off forever. Arla's eyes glowed brighter, her hands moving in the air as if she were weaving the very fabric of the station's energy. The walls of the room hummed with power as she worked, her concentration unwavering. Ethan fired again, hitting another soldier in the leg, but more kept coming. They were outnumbered, and he could feel the pressure mounting. Then, just as Ethan was starting to feel the weight of the battle pressing down on him, there was a sudden burst of light. The entire room seemed to shake, the walls vibrating with the intensity of Arla's power. The security systems of the station flickered, and the Valoran soldiers froze, their weapons lowered as the lights above them flickered and died. Ethan didn't hesitate. He dove toward the door, grabbing Arla's arm as she finished her work. "Let's go!" The two of them bolted from the control room, racing down the hallway as alarms blared behind them. The station was in chaos, and the Valoran soldiers were scrambling to regain control. But Ethan and Arla didn't look back. They had what they needed. The distraction was enough to cover their escape. As they reached the docking bay, Ethan could hear the sounds of the station's systems starting to shut down, the alarms ringing louder. The Valorans were losing their grip on the station. Arla had done it. Ethan led her to the ship, his heart pounding in his chest. They had made it. They were out. But as the ship lifted off the ground and the Black Moon station faded into the distance, Ethan knew this was just the beginning. There were still questions to answer, still dangers to face. But for now, he had one goal: to keep Arla safe. And with her, they could change the course of everything.